and yeah, and just keeping our eye out for new talent and for who is coming up and who is good, and yeah, and who is right for particular projects. Then the other side of being a script editor is working with writers and developing projects, whether that's in development or production. And in production, obviously, you're seeing a script through from, you know, the first sort of one sentence pitch of it through to the transmission of it. And you are there really as the writer's point of contact, the person who, if the writer isn't there, represents the writer's voice to the production, and works with the writer in developing the script, but also not just in terms of the creative process, but also in terms of the practical process of making sure the script is shootable within the schedule, and that the script has sort of answered everybody's questions in terms of the heads of department in TV, the director, the designer, location manager, etc. And then I think the other side of it, from a development point of view, is taking ideas to writers. If you're working with an indie or working with a broadcaster, and there's a particular subject matter that you think is likely to get commissioners' interest, or something that's just interesting, and it's then approaching writers and saying, how about this? Is this an idea you're interested in? But from my point of view, over the last few years, most of the work I've been doing is in working with new writers and finding new writers and introducing them to the industry, rather than going through the often more painful part of the process, which is developing projects with indies or broadcasters and taking them to broadcasters or commissioning editors, and where a lot of them get turned down. So I'm in on the more enjoyable part of the process in some ways, in that the scripts that I develop on the Channel 4 course are more calling card scripts that that the industry is really interested to read, but generally those projects don't get made, but they're a really good way for the writers to get their foot in the door and make a name for themselves in the world of TV, which they're new to, because everyone on the Channel 4 course, the criteria is you can't get on the course if you've got a TV broadcast credit. So everybody who's on the course hasn't got a credit. So,
yeah. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about what is the Channel 4 course that you're talking about, and how do people go about applying for it?
Okay, so the course runs for 6 months. Well, for the last 10 years, it's run from January to June every year. And we work with 12 writers, and there's a selection process, which I'll go back to in a second. But the process of the course is, the course is bookended by a weekend in January and a weekend in June. This is sort of pre-COVID anyway. We're sort of, at the moment, we're making up the rules as we go along, because obviously no one knows exactly what's happening. So we have a weekend of talks for the 12 writers in January, and the writers will come with several ideas. And the main part of the course is the writers writing a 1-hour pilot script for TV, for a series or a serial, over the 5 months from January to May. And then they come back at the second weekend of the course in mid-June with their script. And the first day we do a reading of a 15-minute section of each script with actors. And then the second day, a guest who's had nothing to do with the course up to that point gives feedback to each of the writers on their script. And then we have a drinks evening, usually about 3 weeks after that, where the purpose of which is to introduce those writers to people who are going to employ them in the industry, or agents if they haven't got an agent. But it's so the application period is usually open for about 3 weeks in September, October, and we get anything between like 1,500 to 2,500 entries, and I have a team of readers, and then we have interviews for about 35 to 40 writers and choose 12 writers from that process. So that's broadly what it's about. But my brief from Channel 4 is to find 12 really talented writers new to television and introduce them to the industry, and obviously specifically introduce them to Channel 4 drama department. And we aim to get as diverse a mix of writers as possible, diverse in every sense.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to what you're looking for in a minute, but before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about how successful this course has been and the people who you've had on the course who've gone on to do great things. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that as well.
Okay. Oh, well, I was just looking through the names of everyone. I see that Jane Wainwright is here, who was on the course too. She can probably tell you something more.
You might, yeah.
Can't see that. Okay. So sorry, what was the question? Who have we had on the course? Who's
you know, and what have they done? What has the course provided for?
Okay. Well, yeah, the sort of profile of the writers we have on the course is a mix of people who are purely screenwriters and so you can get onto the course. You can enter a screenplay, a stage play, or a radio play. It just has to be a piece of dramatic writing. It doesn't have to be a screenplay. And there have been a lot of playwrights who've got onto the course. But generally speaking, most years of the 12 writers, I'd say generally about half have got on with a stage play and half have got on with a screenplay. Although Jane got onto the course with a really excellent radio play, actually. And so now it's in the 10th year, so we've had 120 writers on the course. And as a sort of rough guess, I'd say 5 of the scripts that got onto the course have been radio plays, and then roughly equal between stage plays and screenplays. So yeah, so different, and also we have writers of very different levels of experience on the course. We quite often have writers on the course who already have quite a good reputation in theatre and have done a lot of theatre work, and then writers who have had no professional experience at all. So for instance, this year there's one writer who's still at university, and the script she wrote to get onto the course was the first script she'd ever written. And a few years ago we had a writer who had had no formal writing training at all, and in fact when he came up to London for the interview, and I was making small talk to him on the way from Channel 4 reception to the room, and I was doing my standard spiel of, have you ever been into the Channel 4 building before? And he muttered under his breath, he said, no, I've never been to London before. And he was only from Exeter. But anyway, so he was an example of a writer who was like, had no experience of the industry or even London. So the course was, he's a really good writer, but the course sort of from a sort of social networking point of view was quite difficult for him. So there are writers that have worked a lot in theatre, and sort of a big part of the course for them is learning whether they enjoy the collaborative process of working with a script editor. And I know from my experience of working with some writers that are sort of quite taken aback by the sort of level of notes and hands-on feedback they get from a script editor compared to what they get with a theatre commission. And obviously that's a huge generalisation, and it varies from person to person and place to place. Some theatre writers have really thrived in it and have been absolutely brilliant, and have gone on and been sort of equally successful in TV as they have been in theatre. Some have found it more difficult and have just come to the end of the course and possibly decided this isn't for me. I think I'm just going to stick to theatre, which is always a real shame when that happens, because obviously the places are fought over, and that very rarely happens, and it actually happens a lot less now than it used to, because, well, actually for the last 5 or so years we've interviewed writers. We had one year where we had 3 writers who didn't get on particularly well in the course, and we thought if we'd interviewed everyone we probably wouldn't have chosen those writers. And that's quite an education for me, because it just sort of teaches you how much sort of communicating yourself as a writer and selling yourself in a room as a writer is such an important part of the process. Obviously the writing is the main thing, but it's so important that you're able to to pitch yourself and pitch your ideas and excite people across the table. And that's often a real challenge for writers who aren't used to that.
Okay, so skills beyond writing that will help you in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm a great advocate of the fact that you will get jobs from people you already know, and it's very rare to get work from someone you've never met before. So I think, part of the professional process is getting out and meeting people and making sure you meet as many people as possible. Yeah,
which is what we're doing here. Exactly.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is a prime example. Yeah. Do you want me to go into a few names of people who like?
Maybe one or two.
So, well, actually, because like when I was thinking about the Finborough, like Athena Stevens, whose show was on the Finborough a while ago, was on the course.
Yeah.
Last year, I can't remember, a couple of years ago, who was excellent. What's he called? Chris Thompson was on the course about 3 years ago, who wrote Carthage, that was on the Finborough. Anders Luskan has been on the course. Vinay Patel. Anna Simon, who's done really well. Gina Moriarty. Sorry, my brain's gone blank. I actually had I've got a list of everyone who's been on the Finborough course, which I meant to find for this, and I couldn't find it.
No, what I was really trying to elicit is that, it is a course of value, and people do progress from this course, which isn't always the case. And I don't want to, name particular other initiatives, but I think sometimes they build hope and then there's nothing, it's just a dead end. But I don't think that's the case for the Channel 4 course. No. If people put in the work, it does lead to further work in TV, which is great.
Yeah, well, obviously I agree with that. And I feel, and that's one of the things I feel quite bullish about, that, generally it's a huge opportunity for the people who come on the course. And so I'm on their case the whole time, emphasizing that to them and making sure they put the work in, because it is a huge amount of work writing a 1 hour pilot script from scratch in 5 months. And normally in the industry, you probably have a lot longer than that. But the writers who write good scripts on the course and who have already written a really good script to get on the course, the industry are really interested in them when they come out of the course, and that has sort of grown over the years of the course, and it's a lot different now to what it was when the course started, and the industry is a lot different now to what it was when it started. There's a lot. I mean, it's still just as difficult in some ways, but there is a lot more money in the industry and a lot more work, and a lot more work is now filtering down to newer writers, and it becomes a bit of a feeding frenzy for some of the writers when they finish the course. And one of the things we talk to them about is trying to manage your career and manage the meetings you go to, and learning how to say no to work, because there've been a few people who've come off the course who have just got really excited, sort of completely understandably, by the offers that are made to them, and have said yes to everything. And a year later, they are literally close to a breakdown. So writers have to be careful, but it's very exciting at the same time.
Sure. If I can just come in now with the question that, everybody wants to know, what are you looking for when they send in a script to apply for this course? What do you want to see? Yeah,
that's such a difficult question to answer. And the answer is that we're looking for the old cliche of the distinctive voice, and somebody who's got something different and exciting to say, and says and tells a story in a way that feels fresh and distinctive and original. And we're absolutely not looking for a really competent genre script. We're not looking for things that second guess the industry. We've taken on some quite sort of left field ideas, but this is a conversation I have every year with my readers, but what we're looking for. And generally So last couple of years, I've had a team of 7 readers, and we meet up once a week and discuss all the scripts that they've read. And before that meeting, they will send me a short report on each script, and I'll read all of those and try and read as many of the scripts as I can before we meet up. And always at the end of the first week, I say to them, you're being way too kind, because we're basically trying to choose 12 writers from 1,500 applications. So unless you are really bowled over by this script, there's no point recommending it. But it is incredibly subjective, and all the readers like different scripts, and I like different scripts to the ones the readers like. So I'm sure we miss some really brilliant scripts every year, but it is, you know, at the end of the day, that is one thing I've learned, that it is so subjective, and, you know, a brilliant script is a different thing to everybody, and no two people like the same script. But I think what we're looking for is just a boldness of voice, and people who are writing about something with passion and fire, and their script really engages you emotionally as well as intellectually, and that they've got a really strong handle on characterization, storytelling, and if it's a screenplay, that the way they crafted the script has a certain level of sophistication. I actually read a really good script today, actually, that was sent to me by an agent, and I'm just trying to sort of wrap my brain to think what it was that was good about that script. And that was just, it was like quite a conventional stage play, in fact, about a suicide in a family and all the ripples from that. But the characterization was just beautifully written, and it was, you know, I was a bit of an emotional wreck at the end of it, and that's what you look for in a script. So that's very much what we're looking for. And so this year, well, every year we select, myself and the readers select like 35 scripts, and then we have interviews, and it's only at that point that people from the Channel 4 drama department read the scripts of the writers they're going to interview, because usually there's like 3 people from the Channel 4 drama department join me. I do all the interviews, and they do like a third each. And the head of development in Channel 4 drama this year said to me, she said it was such a delight reading those scripts. It was like they were so much better than most of the scripts we get submitted from production companies that feel like a bit tired and cynical, and that they, you know, have thought too hard about what Channel 4 is looking for, rather than just giving us something that is really wonderful and outstanding. So that's what we're looking for, really. We're looking for something that isn't second guessing the industry, but comes from a writer's guts and heart, and it's just a really powerful piece of writing. And also we're looking for things that have a real humour and humanity as well. I think there are very few scripts I read from the enormous pile that make me laugh, and Channel 4 drama, you know, is about humour as well as about bleakness.
That's really interesting. Can I also ask you, because you actually mentioned this in the day-long course that I went to, about, you know, pet peeves that you might have about looking at a script, about presentation, etc. So what not to do?
Yeah. Well, yes, yeah, that's interesting that you remember my pet peeves about presentation. But I think, you know, when you're submitting your script professionally, you're generally submitting it to people who read a lot of scripts. And the thing that I find probably most demoralizing when I'm reading a script is that I can't understand what's going on, whether that's because it's poorly presented or just because there's a lack of clarity to the storytelling. But I find that so often in scripts. And then a lot of the time I'm thinking, am I just being a bit dense with this script? And if I just read it a bit with slightly better concentration, I get it. Occasionally that's the case, but then you will read a really good script, and there's a complete clarity to the writing of a good script that just invites you in and enables you to enjoy it without worrying about the writing and about the presentation of it. So I think that's really important, and I think that's one of the most difficult things to do, actually, is to stand back from your script and look at it as a reader would look at it. So it's just like really boring things like, if you've got a character with a unisex name, tell us if it's a male or a female, help us envisage the characters, and help us, if it's a screenplay, help us experience it as a film on the page, so that the action really comes off the page and it's dynamic and visual, and don't waste 3 paragraphs describing the furniture if it's not really key to the story. So that is a huge one, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are you very focused on presentation? Does it have to be final draft, for example?
It doesn't have to be final draft, but I would say if it's a screenplay, it must be written with screenwriting software, and because there are a few free alternatives. Celtex is the one that comes to mind, but there are others I know that I can't remember the name of. Yeah. But yeah, if you're writing a screenplay, don't write it in Word, because it just doesn't look like a professional screenplay if it's written in Word, and you'll just find it really hard to lay it out if it's written in Word. And you know, the screenplay format has sort of come into being for a reason, because it is easier to read, and it does make the story easier to visualize, and so you can visualize how it will play on screen. So yeah, I think formatting is really important, and obviously the same is true if you're submitting a stage play as well, that it needs to be really well laid out.
And you know, properly proofread, and doesn't look like it just brushed off last night and I'll send it in, they'll see my genius. They won't, actually. So
yeah, exactly. So yeah, the people who get on the course generally, you know, their scripts have been through a long development process, and that's why they're good. There are exceptions to that, like, for instance, the person I was just telling you about who got onto the course with her first ever script, but that's slightly freakish. And generally, the writers that get onto the course have written scripts and then have got some really good advice and have redrafted it. And that's great, you know, because that's part of the process in the industry, is responding to notes and making your script better through that collaborative process. And one of the things the writers learn and the script editors on the course learn as the process on the course is whether the writers will thrive in that process of working with script editors. Some writers find it really difficult, and some writers just take to it brilliantly. So yeah, the writers I'm working with this year, for instance, have just responded to it really well, and it's just been a joy working with them and having conversations with them about the story choices they've made. So yeah, I'm very excited about the scripts that I'm working on at the moment on the course, and that's, yeah, it's been very nice in lockdown to have those scripts outlines coming in on a regular basis.
Can I just sort of move on, because I know you do the Channel 4 thing, but you also run your own script consultant courses, which can be a day long or longer. I'm not quite sure how.
Well, I've done several different ones, actually. In fact, just before lockdown, I did a new one, which was about writing a short film script, and I had 12 people on it, and it was over three-hour sessions of an evening in London, and they came with an idea on the first week and then left after the third week with a first draft of a short film script, which was really enjoyable, actually, because and it was quite exciting for the writers to like come with nothing and leave with a script, and some really excellent scripts came out of that, actually. But so that was the first time I'd done that, and I will definitely be doing that again, because it was just exciting to actually have a script at the end of the process, or 12 scripts. Mm-hmm. So I've done. Did you come to my one-day creativity for scriptwriters? Yeah. So that course is just a course about generating ideas and about and it's about characterization and about story and how to come up with ideas. So that was very much a creative course, but it didn't go into any detail about the craft or about the business. Then I do a 2-day course, a 2-day screenwriting course, again for a maximum of 20 people. And the first day is about the craft, and the second day is about the business and about getting work. And I always have 3 guests on that course, 2 screenwriters and 1 literary agent. So I've had people like Anna Simon, Vinay Patel, and then the agent from the agency and independent, Archie Maddox, who was on the course a couple of years ago, has come to talk on it. Nathaniel Price, who was on the course a couple of years ago. Yeah, so those are the main courses I do. Okay,
and if anybody's interested in looking up, your courses, and you do a newsletter and that, so just to check out your website, which is scriptconsultant.co.uk, is that right?
It's script-consultant.co.uk. Thank you, because Script Consultant was taken. But thank you for plugging my services.
No, yes, worth plugging. I know that.
Thank you. Can I just mention that the newsletter, because at the moment that's normally fortnightly, and it's free. And there is a back catalogue of like nearly 10 years now of weekly or fortnightly newsletters, which has got loads of interviews with different people. But recently, during lockdown, I got in touch with quite a few writer and script editor friends and asked them to write something for it. So at the moment, they're weekly because I'm alternating what I've written with interviews. So next week, this coming Friday, there's a really great interview in which Anna Simon talks to the director Richard Laxton about how he chooses a script, which, I would really recommend.
Okay, I think we'll all be looking out for that. And can I also just ask about the next deadline? I know it's being affected by lockdown and everything, but if somebody is interested in applying for Channel 4, when roughly do you think the application deadline will be, so they'll know when to work toward?
Well, I'm hoping it will still be September, October, but if you look at my website, that will give you the information nearer the time. At the moment, it's slightly hard to tell because most of the Channel 4 drama department have been furloughed, and the Channel 4 course has sort of extended because we haven't really got a second weekend to aim for at the moment. So the scripts are being written, but they're not going to be as ready as soon as they normally are. And obviously we won't be having the drinks evening anytime soon. But I'm hoping that even if it carries on sort of throughout a lot of this year, that we will still accept entries for next year's course in the same time frame in September and October. But watch this space, because I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, nobody really knows, and I guess there's a possibility it might be online next year.
I hope not, but who knows?
Yeah, okay. Right, Phil, thank you very much for that. I would like to open it up to questions from the group now. If I've asked you all to, hi Carmen's come back. I've asked you all to just turn off your video so we can save on bandwidth, but if you have a question, please just raise your hand. Carmen's she's driving the Zoom machine at the moment. Carmen will just unmute you, I think, but you have to unmute. It'll come up on the screen and we'll tell you.
I think if people, if you type a message in the message bit and just say you'd like to ask a question, then I'll ask you to unmute yourself. So,
okay.
Yeah. So if you want to ask a question, if you
bear with us. This is our first time doing.
That's okay.
Great. So we've got a question. From Maud. They're all coming in. Great. So Maud, do you want to unmute yourself and go first? And then I'll work my way through the list before we run out of time, okay? So Maud, go ahead.
Should I turn my video on or not?
Yeah, go for it. I think turn your video on, yeah. Hello.
Hello, Maud.
Hi. I wanted to ask, because I think that I have sort of taught myself to curb my ideas to the constraints of theatre, and I found that quite creative. But now I'm finding that quite restrictive, and I sort of want to take off those constraints. And I was wondering if you had any tips for kind of scaling up your ideas, sort of from thinking of them in a room to thinking them as television ideas, and sort of what you need to ask yourself of an idea to be confident that it works as a television idea?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Can I first throw that question back at you and ask you how you've curbed your ideas to make them fit into theatre?
Yeah, I think I think just in terms of having something really broad that I want to say and that I want to talk about, and then kind of finding the story to go around it, I sort of build it around the constraints. And so if I've got two characters in a two-hander, say in a theatre like the Finborough, then I've already got those two characters that I can kind of build the idea into. And I put it in one room, or I might put it in imaginary space, but it sort of happens in a room.
Yeah, I see. That's really interesting, and that's another of the things I feel really strongly about. And I think, like, it's really hard to make general observations about scripts when you're reading several hundred over 2 months. But generally, over the last few years, one sort of negative observation I've had is that there aren't enough huge ideas. There aren't enough ideas of scale. And I think, like, when you're writing spec script for the screen, and when you're quite new to the process, that is like your one chance to write something massive and to really go for it. And when you're sort of, you know, like, just even in the last week, the things, you know, that are happening in the world at the moment are just insane. And, you know, there is sort of like, you know, apocalypse going on all around us. And then when you're sort of living in the real world and experiencing that and reading everything about it and looking at Twitter and just seeing everything that's happening, it's sort of like, it, you know, it makes you almost can't contain it in your brain. And then I get to scripts and I'm reading about millennials going to a nightclub in Shoreditch and having a identity existential crisis, and I just think, I don't really give a shit. So that's being deliberately provocative, and, you know, it's obviously entirely possible to write an absolutely brilliant script about millennials going to a nightclub in Hoxton, which could be hilarious and you know, really sort of mind expanding. But I would say generally there aren't enough scripts that use the possibilities of screenwriting. And I think at this stage, you shouldn't worry about budget or logistics. You should just absolutely go for it and write something. You know, if you want to write something political, you know, absolutely go for it. And if you want to write something that is sort of multinational, go for it. Because those are the sort of scripts I don't really see enough of. And yeah, another bugbear or sort of observation I have about reading all the Channel 4 course scripts is you get a lot of sort of bleak dystopian scripts set in a sort of non-specific future 1 year from now where everything has gone to shit. And my response to those generally is, everything's gone to shit already. Write about the world now and how it's gone to shit, because that's really relevant. And it's sort of like, right, putting in a dystopian future just sort of like takes that edge of immediacy off it, in my opinion. And obviously, I'm making huge generalizations, and there are always exceptions to those observations. But I would say generally, yeah, be bold in your choice of idea. And if you feel passionately about things that are going on in the world today, write about them, because not enough people do. And it's like writers like James Graham seem to have cornered the market in writing about politics with a capital P. And I think he's a really interesting writer in that, even though he sort of hasn't got a sort of overtly strong political ideology in his work, arguably, all his ideas are big headline ideas, and are just like bigger ideas than most writers go for, and that's why everyone wants to hire him. Anders Luskarn's another really good example of a writer who is so politically committed, and yeah, I love Anders's work for that reason. He's so angry about everything, and you know, he's sort of smart enough to know you've got to find a way to dramatize that without it becoming didactic, which isn't necessarily, being didactic is not necessarily a bad thing in my opinion. But yeah, I read too many scripts and I get to the end of and I think to myself, I don't know what you're saying about that. I want to know why you feel passionately about that subject, why you feel angry, or why that excites you. Why have you written about this family or whatever?
Okay. Thank you. I think we have quite a few questions coming in there, Carmen. Is that right? I see the messages coming up here. So is there somebody else who we can bring in? Carmen, you're muted.
Classic. Error. The second person is Farah.
Farah, hi.
Hi.
Hello,
Hello.
Thank you for that. That was so interesting. I wanted to ask, so you said you don't want to read scripts that are second guessing the industry. What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's not very interesting to read scripts that are quite like a Sally Wainwright script about a policewoman in the north of England, but not quite as good as Sally Wainwright. And it's not, and it's like you get a lot of Tarantino-esque scripts, or you get a lot of sort of Breaking Bad type ideas about someone who's lived a blameless life, who decides they're going to start dealing drugs, and that sort of thing.
Right. Cool.
Yeah, it's like when I read a script, I want it to reveal something about you, as well as showing you're a brilliant storyteller. I want to know this is someone who's got something to say, and something to say that no one else has got to say, and says it in a different way to everyone else. Yeah, that sounds very demanding and difficult, but it's just about writing something that excites you, really, and not writing something that's cynical, I would say.
There's something with more truth in it, something that reveals.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
Something that feels honest and truthful, yeah. And it is tricky because it's very easy for me to say this running the Channel 4 course, and it's a wonderful position to be in, to choose the writers from the Channel 4 course. But at the same time, I'm slightly aware, I'm very aware that people who come off the back of the Channel 4 course, I mean, there are people who come off the course who are lucky enough to then go straight on to writing their own projects, their own authored projects. But there are also a lot of people who go on to write episodes of Doctors or Hollyoaks or Casualty or Holby. And everything I'm saying now about you writing Spec scripts, well, it applies much less so if you're writing an episode of Casualty, and you have to, work out what's possible within an episode of Casualty. But just because I'll embarrass Jane Wainwright and just tell you a bit about the script she wrote to get on to the course, which was a radio play about someone who was blind, or were they deaf? I think they were blind. Jane can put me right.
Yeah,
and
you must reveal yourself there.
But it was just a beautiful piece of writing and a really great story, and it was really moving. I still remember the emotional impact that script had on everyone who read it or listened to it on the radio. Was it about being? It was blind, not deaf, wasn't it?
No, it was agoraphobic.
Oh, sorry, I'm wrong on every count.
They're all kind of the same.
It was very, very good, and so I think it was the emotional connection your script made that really stood out, and also because it was a really great piece of storytelling with great characters. But often I remember scripts for the effect they have on me, as I've just demonstrated, rather than the actual specifics of the content.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Carmen?
Yeah, I think next is Myrn.
Myrn? Hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, yeah. How are you?
Oh, no?
Okay, unmute yourself, Myrn.
I thought it happened when you do the video. I would love to know your opinion on flashbacks in TV shows, and when they work and when they don't work for you. And
Well, I don't. I don't think they're a bad thing in themselves, because I think TV can often be quite a conservative medium, and people can get very suspicious of flashbacks and voiceover. I just think when they don't work is when they're sort of predictable and expositional, and they're just a lazy way of giving you backstory. They have to add another layer of intrigue to the story, or another layer of complexity to the story. What else can I say? But I wouldn't shy away from them. But if you're going to use them, make sure you use them boldly and imaginatively, because they've been done so many times before. If they just feel like a predictable device, and you feel like you know what you're going to get from them when you go back to them, then I would avoid them. But in themselves, are you thinking of a particular script you're writing, or are you thinking of a particular use of flashback?
Yeah, I'd like to be able to see what's written already filmed, see if it works, because I just don't think it works at the moment. So I'm trying to figure out, is it the like NAF flashbacks? Maybe, I don't know. Right,
and do you think they don't work because they're too expositional, or they're
that's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah. Well, why don't you try writing without the flashbacks and see if it works without the flashbacks? Because my instinct is always that the less information you give the audience, the better in some ways. And I think a lot of writers' instinct is to sort of over worry and give the audience too much information before they need it. Anyway, it's very hard to talk about it without reading your script.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, that wasn't very helpful.
No, thank you so much. Carmen, who's next up? Catherine. Catherine Lord. Catherine, unmute yourself. Press the microphone. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Can you hear me now? Can you see me? I can't see me, but never mind.
Yeah, there you are.
Yes,
Am
we
I
can.
there? Oh, fabulous. Yeah. Hi, Philip. Thank you. Thank you for telling us what it's about. It sounds really exciting. And I apologise if you've said some of this. I couldn't get in for 6 minutes because of technical problems, but it's about the actual course and how you're working together. I'm just fascinated by the process, because I have friends who are showing me for production companies their Bibles. Those are exciting, pictures and episodes and character outlines. And I was saying, you start with this because I have to jump into a deep pool of not knowing what it is and just write and write and write until I find that, when you feel like, what the hell am I doing? And then you find it. And I said, but that's my process. And maybe I need to learn to do Bibles, or I'm just fascinated by how you guide all these different processes.
Yeah, well, obviously every writer has, every writer works in their own way. And it's part of a script editor's job to enable you to find, the process that to enable you to work with the process that gets the best out of you. Having said that, one of the sort of processes in the Channel 4 course is asking writers to come to the first weekend with 3 or 4 ideas that they pitch verbally to you, and then once you've discussed which idea they want to write, then they go away and write like a 1 to 3 page outline for it. Then we ask them to expand that into a more detailed document. And people do find that hard to sort of jump through all those hoops before they write the first draft of the script. But in my experience, sometimes when you get to like a scene by scene outline, or a beat sheet they're sometimes called, like a really detailed outline that sort of tells you the action in every single scene without the dialogue. In my experience, sometimes those documents can be as enjoyable to read almost as the script. And from a script editing point of view, you read those documents and you pretty much know the script's going to be wonderful sometimes from those documents. And from a production company's point of view, the truth is that they are only going to pay you 10% of your script fee to write one of those documents.
Yeah.
While at the same time, you're probably having to do about 80% of the work in writing those documents, which is one of the reasons writers often don't like writing those documents. There's a really excellent script editor called Hilary Norrish, producer script editor, who comes to talk on the Channel 4 course every year, and she breaks writers down into two types, the vomiters and the plotters, and and says that one set of writers are vomiters and they just splurge out their first draft, and that's when the real work begins, and another set of writers are the plotters who work everything out in detail before they ever come to the script. And in terms of the industry, it's probably less stressful if you're a plotter than a vomiter, because if you have to write your first draft to discover what your story is, it's going to be very labor intensive and considerably less well paid, and people will not want to see the script. They will want to see the outline before they see the script a lot of the time. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I like to be schizoid, do both.
yeah. But but everyone has their different way of working.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Okay, who's next up, Carmen?
Jasmine.
Hello, Jasmine.
You've written your question, but you're welcome to sort of ask it yourself.
Hey, Jasmine.
Here I am. Hi, Phil.
Oh, hello.
Hi, Phil. Thank you very much. That was very informative. I've loved every minute of it. I'm one of those awful practical people, and I just wanted to ask you, when you get these 2,000 submissions, are they anonymous?
No.
And okay, how do you then guarantee, and are Channel 4 good about this, about looking at diversity with gender and race and age? Because I think to whittle 2,000 down to 12, you're the gatekeepers, and it's really, really important.
I agree, yeah, and absolutely. And whatever I want to do, Channel 4 are incredibly hot on diversity in every aspect of diversity. And so I think I'm right in saying there's never been a year where we've had more males than females. I think there's been 1 or 2 years where we've had 6 of each, but mostly it's considerably more female writers than male. We always try to have a lot of BAME writers. I think we've got, of the 12 this year, either 6 or 7 are BAME. And we also try and have as much diversity in terms of age, where people come from in the country, whether they've written for theatre or screen, and their level of experience as well. But when you're only choosing 12 writers from 1,500 this year, but more than that in previous years, obviously, there's going to be a lot of disappointed people, and it is frustrating only choosing 12 people. But yeah, we do try as hard as possible to be as diverse as possible. I don't know if that's answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm glad to hear that it really features highly on the priority, because I'm an agent. I'm not a writer.
Right.
I deal with a lot of writers, and I find that very frustrating. And I also find it really frustrating that, much as I love to hear you say it's changing, new writers are getting a shot, it's trickling down, my experience is it isn't. And the Sally Wainwrights are still the first choices. There's probably a list of about 30 writers who all broadcasters go to first. And that's really frustrating. So please, these 12 writers that you're championing, bring them on, because I'm sick to death of all those old writers.
I think you're right that broadcasters will inevitably go to the Sally Wainwrights first. But I just think now that most of those writers are terminally unavailable because there is so much work for Sally Wainwright and Jack Thorne, and that means that work is filtering down to newer writers. And I know from the experience of writers who've been on the course recently, like Anna Semuyaba, Teresa Rikoko, Nathaniel Price, Archie Maddox, who I mentioned before, they're the writers I'm talking about who have been just overwhelmed with the amount of work they're being offered. Charlie Cavell, who was on the course about 5 years ago now, is another example. So it's always difficult, but I would say, I mean, I've been in this industry a long time, and generally it's not as difficult for new writers now as it was 10 years ago. Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things about the Channel 4 course recently is that we've had like very few white heterosexual males on the course, and it's quite interesting, like, to hear some of the unhappiness in the industry from people who like used to make a career writing episodes of The Bill or other 9 o'clock series, who are now finding it really hard to get work. But from my point of view, we get more and more entries every year from BAME writers, and I would also say we get more and more outstandingly good scripts from BAME writers, and that's been really exciting, being part of that process and seeing those writers now being recognised and starting to get work. And it just means there are just more and more interesting voices writing in the industry, and I think that will definitely those writers will come through in the next few years, and that will be more and more the case.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Daisy, you're next.
Daisy, hello, Daisy. Daisy.
Hello. I've just realised I'm logged into my friend's Zoom.
Oh,
right.
So that's a great start. Hi.
I guess you're not Daisy then. What's your name?
My name's Andy.
Andy. Hi, Andy.
Hi. Thank you so much for everything so far. I know this came up briefly in a couple of questions ago, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about spec scripts, especially in terms of what you were saying about looking for a unique voice, looking for something the writer is really passionate about writing, looking about topics and broadening scope and all those things about finding the personal voice and feeling how passionate they are about it when you have the constraints of writing a spec script. Because I'm just getting into doing that. I'm working on a couple of scripts that I want to send out, and I'm seeing applications that need that and a spec script or want a spec script. And it just feels like a different tool set that I have less interest in doing than working on my own thing, if that makes sense. I'm just wondering.
Yeah. So when you're talking about working on your own thing, well, that is a screenplay that you intend to make. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So you're a writer-director or a writer-producer?
Writer, producer, working on a couple of things to produce myself, but also to send out. And I've just seen a couple of, courses and open calls that, and so I always end up going back to writing my passion project rather than figuring out how to do the spec script.
But then what I was saying was that your passion project should be your spec script.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's that simple, really, because I don't know, when you say you alternate between your passion project and your spec script, how is your mindset different for writing your spec script?
Because I'm constantly thinking about doing it in this, trying to capture the voice of the show that I'm trying to apply for.
Okay.
Trying to find the voice, trying to do the confines or restrictions of that particular show, rather than being creative in the story of myself.
Okay, so can I ask what sort of shows you're talking about when you're applying for shows and writing a script that's sort of geared to those shows?
Well, nothing particularly yet. This is a new thing I'm seeing out there. But so for instance, I've seen things which is like a list of BBC shows and like write a spec script for one of these, or Channel 4 shows and write a spec script for one of these. And I haven't got going on any of those just yet.
Okay, so you're talking about sort of like shadow schemes for things like Holby or Casualty or EastEnders.
Sure.
Yeah, so I would say generally people get onto those shadow schemes by writing a brilliant passion project spec script. They don't get onto those schemes by writing an EastEnders or a Doctor's script. I think that doesn't really exist. That culture doesn't exist in the UK in the same way as it does in the US.
Okay.
People generally aren't interested in reading your spec Casualty script, however brilliant it is. They just want to see an original piece of work by you, and then work out how your voice is going to work in Casualty. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Yeah.
Okay. That's great. Thank you, Andy. I think we have time for one more question, Carmen. Who's next on the list there?
So Tilly, that's you. Do you want to? Tilly?
I'll jump on.
Tilly.
I'll jump on. Hey, it's a nice rounding up question, is what's one of your fave things on the telly at the moment, and does it fit into a particular trend?
Well, the things that I've been binging just in the last few days have been a French series called Call My Agent. Have you ever seen that? Which is on Netflix. Very good. Yeah. It's just a really good example of series TV, and it's one of those series where you just have more and more engagement and affection for the characters the more you watch of it, and it's just, the storytelling's really good in it. It's quite light and frothy and silly, but I think it's really, the stories are really well told. And then after that, I've just started watching Money Heist.
I'm 3 episodes in.
Yeah, I'm 3 episodes in as well, actually. And I think that's really excellent as well. I just think the storytelling is really tight, and it's very generic, but there's a real attitude to the storytelling and a real sense of creativity and originality in the way they tell the story. So I'm enjoying that very much. Yeah, I thought Normal People was very good. I was quite gripped by that. What else has been on? Yeah, that's it recently. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think that's really all we have time for, unfortunately, in this meeting. I mean, normally we'd all head off to the bar at the Finborough now and let you be hounded by all our regulars for, further information, but you can escape that this time.
I'm very sorry I can't do that, I must say, because yeah, it's been very nice talking to everyone. And to say, so I hope you can still see me, because I'm just trying to copy the chat into the document so I can see all the other questions. Sorry. Just trying to concentrate on 2 things at the same time. Yeah, I was just going to say thank you very much, Sue, for plugging my website. And if you do want to look at the website, if you do want to look at my newsletters, please do. And also, if you want to follow up by emailing me any further questions, you can do that through the website as well. I may not answer immediately, but I probably will, depending on what I'm up to. But yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Oh, thank you very much, Philip. It's been really, really, really useful. And I'm sure that you'll get a lot of applications from this group now. You watch out for the Finborough Forum Zoom group on the applications. Yeah, I'm just wondering if Neil is there, and if he wanted to come in. No pressure, Neil, if you don't want to. I just thought he might. It's kind of hard to see everybody. Yes, Neil, you're there.
Oh. I've been sitting here going, yes, I totally agree, all the way through.
Thank you.
Anders and James started with us.
Sorry, who started with you?
Anders and James. James Graham, Anders Lasgarten both started.
All right.
But Anders is one of only 2 people who sent us an unsolicited script, and it went straight on.
Brilliant. Which script was that?
The Insurgents, his very first play.
All right. Excellent.
And then James Graham, it took a bit longer, but he's doing all right now.
He's doing okay, yeah.
Thank you so much.
That's a pleasure. Well, that's just an example of how theatre can be a great starting point. I mean, for to go on to other theatre work, but also for screen work as well. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
Totally. Would you be okay if we put this on YouTube for the public?
I would be, yeah. That's fine.
You would be. That's okay.
Yeah.
And everybody else okay with that? I mean, we don't have to. It's just while we're closed, and obviously we're losing tens of thousands of pounds. We're trying to get as much online content out there so everyone remembers we exist. So if you have a problem, let me know and we won't. But if you're cool with it, we may well do that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Neil. Phil, again, thank you. And, I'm sure you'll hear from us all. And if I can also say thank you to Carmen for being my co-pilot on this and saving us from near disaster a few times there. Thanks a million. Guys, everybody, I thank you so much for turning up. You can turn on your videos very quickly.
Yeah,
wave at each other.
Oh, yeah.
So thanks so much for dropping in, and we will be back next month, hopefully, and probably even a little bit more smoothly, and looking forward to seeing you all again.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Okay.
Bye. We'll email you all the details.
Bye. Have a good night.
Lovely to see you. Bye. Bye-bye.